I've been back for 11 days. I want to be clear about that, because I need you to understand, I'm not writing this from inside the cave. I'm sitting at my kitchen table. My daughter is asleep down the hall, the dishwasher is running. Everything around me is normal, and I'm not in danger. I'm saying that up front, because the thing I need to tell you isn't about danger. It's about what happens when you learn something you can't unlearn, and how the ground you walk on stops feeling solid. Not because it moved, but because you finally understood it was never solid to begin with. My brother Nate called me on a Tuesday, middle of the afternoon, which was unusual for him. Nate works underground more than most people work above it. He's been caving since he was 16. Serious caving, the kind with the vertical rope work and tight squeezes and 40-hour trips that make my chest hurt just thinking about. He calls me on weekends usually, sometimes not even that. So a Tuesday afternoon call meant something. I need you to come see something, he said. No, hello. No warm-up, just that. See what? I asked. Lily was on the floor behind me, building something out of wooden blocks. I could hear them clicking together. I can't explain it over the phone. It won't make sense unless you see it. Nate, I have a 3-year-old. David can watch her. I talked to him already. That stopped me. Nate calling David directly meant he'd thought about this, planned it. My brother is a lot of things, but deliberate isn't usually one of them. He moves through life the way he moves through caves, head first, fast, trusting his instincts. The fact that he'd called my husband first, arranged childcare, set the stage before calling me, that was new. What did you find? I asked. I found where the map ends, he said. And I kept going. I knew which cave he meant. Bridger Cavern in Pocahontas County, West Virginia. Nate had been spending weekends there for the better part of a year, working on a personal survey project. Bridger is a well-known system, maybe 5 miles of mapped passage, mostly horizontal, popular with the regional caving community. The official survey had been completed in the late 90s by a group out of Virginia Tech. 5 miles of clean, reconciled data, good maps, reliable, except the cave doesn't end at 5 miles. Everyone who's been there knows that. The survey ends at 5 miles. The last passage keeps going, a clean, walkable trunk channel heading roughly southwest. And at the final survey station, someone had spray painted in blocky yellow letters, "Survey terminates. Passage continues." It had always bothered certain people. You don't just stop surveying a going passage. There are wait lists of cave systems that would kill for a trunk channel that size. But the Virginia Tech team stopped, published their data, and moved on. When Nate asked around, the answers were always vague. The team had graduated, funding ran out, interest shifted, normal academic attrition. Nobody thought it was strange. He'd been pushing past the survey limit since March, laying his own line, setting his own stations. He hadn't told many people, not because it was secret, because the data wasn't making sense. And Nate didn't want to publish bad data. The passages get bigger, he told me on the phone. That's the part that won't make sense until you see it. Bigger how? In every direction. The deeper I go, the bigger they get. And not gradually. It's like, he paused. I could hear him breathing. You know how, if you're walking into a cave, the passages generally narrow, get smaller, tighter, more constrained? Yeah, it does the opposite. After the survey limit, the main trunk widens. The ceiling goes up. I've been in rooms down there that I can't find the walls of with 100-foot tape. And that's wrong, Marin, that's geologically wrong. Caves don't do that. I told him I'd come, not because I was curious. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't. Caves make me uncomfortable in the way that deep water makes some people uncomfortable. Not a phobia, just a persistent, bodily wrongness. I went because my brother asked me, and because the way he said it, not frightened and not excited, but certain in a way I'd never heard from him, made me think he needed someone. Not a caving partner. A witness, someone who would see what he'd seen and tell him it was real. I drove down on a Friday. David took the weekend off. Lily cried when I left, which she always does, and stopped before I reached the highway, which she also always does. I drove 5 hours to Durban, West Virginia, and met Nate at the motel he'd been using as a base camp. He wasn't alone, he'd brought 3 others. Joel Reeves was the oldest, mid-50s, deeply weathered. A retired civil engineer who'd been caving for 30 years. He had the quiet authority of someone who'd been deep enough often enough to have stopped being impressed by anything. Priya Chandrasekaran was the opposite. Young, intense, finishing a geology PhD at WVU. She'd been interested in Bridger for her dissertation and had jumped at the chance to collect data beyond the survey limit. The fourth was Theo Marsh, a friend of Nate's from the local grotto, maybe 25, enthusiastic in a way that reminded me of my brother at that age. Strong, cheerful, relentlessly competent with equipment, 5 of us total. That mattered later. Nate briefed us that night in the motel parking lot, tailgate down on his truck. Maps spread across the bedliner. The official Bridger survey was pristine, detailed, methodical, exhaustive up to the terminal station. Beyond that, Nate had made his own map on graph paper, and looking at it, I understood immediately why he hadn't published. The scale was wrong. His map showed passages that were in places wider than the entire mapped system above them. Rooms that would be among the largest in the country if they were real. Vertical extent that put the deeper sections below any known karst formation in the region. Either Nate's survey skills had completely collapsed and he'd been doing this for 15 years, or the cave was something that shouldn't exist. I've triple-checked every measurement, he said, before anyone asked. Priya, that's part of why you're here. I want you to run an independent survey. Joel studied the map without expression. How many trips have you made past the terminal station? 14 alone? Yes. Joel looked at him. In the caving community, solo caving is controversial at best, reckless at worst. 14 solo trips past the limit of documented safety was the kind of thing that got people blacklisted from grottos and gear shops. But Nate met his gaze steadily. 14 times, Joel said. And you're still going back. Because it's real, Nate said. And I need other people to confirm it. We went in Saturday morning. The first part was familiar territory for everyone except me. The entrance to Bridger is a wide, muddy walk-in at the base of a limestone bluff. No rappelling, no crawling. Just a gentle downward slope into darkness, tourist-friendly for the first few hundred yards. Then the tourist trail ends at a locked gate. And beyond that, it's real caving. I'd been underground before, but only a few times, and only in beginner systems. The physical reality of Bridger hit me harder than I expected. Not the darkness, I'd anticipated that. The weight, you feel the rock above you in a way that's not psychological. It's atmospheric. The air is different. Heavier in a way that has nothing to do with oxygen content. It presses on you. Your body knows on some animal level that there is a mountain on top of you, and no amount of rational thought makes that knowledge go away. We moved through the mapped sections efficiently. Nate led, Joel took the rear. The rest of us strung out between them with the easy rhythm of a group that's done this before, which, except for me, they had the passages were exactly as mapped. Trunk channel, muddy floor, occasional formations, regular survey stations marked with aluminum tags wired to the wall. Every 20 minutes, Priya would stop and note a station number, confirming it against the published survey. Every reading matched. I found myself watching the station numbers climb. BR 1112, BR 189, BR 263. Each one a small aluminum disc, stamped with its number, evidence that someone had been here before me and documented what they found, and left a record that could be followed. The stations were a kind of company. Everyone said, a person stood here, measured this space, and found it real and stable. Stable enough to write down. 3 hours in, we reached the terminal station, station BR 447, a small aluminum disc crimped to a bolt in the wall, about chest height. The passage at this point was maybe 10 feet wide and 8 feet tall, comfortable, walkable, the kind of passage you could stroll through. The yellow spray paint was still legible on the wall nearby. Survey terminates. Passage continues. This is where we leave the map, Nate said. He said it simply, but I saw him look at me when he said it. Not at Joel. Not at Priya, at me, his sister, the person he'd brought here not for expertise but for trust. Priya set up her instruments. She took a compass reading, a clinometer shot, a laser distance measurement to the next visible point ahead. She logged everything in a yellow waterproof notebook. Baseline established, she said. We're officially off survey. Everything from here is new data. Theo cracked a glow stick and dropped it at the threshold. A green smear of chemical light marking the boundary between the documented world and whatever came next. Breadcrumb, he said, and grinned. Nobody else smiled. We kept walking. For the first 20 minutes past the terminal station, nothing seemed different. The trunk passage continued. Same dimensions, same muddy floor, same limestone walls streaked with brown and gray. I started to wonder if Nate had exaggerated sometimes. When you spend too much time alone underground, the darkness plays tricks on perception. Not hallucinations exactly, but distortions of scale. You lose reference points. A room that feels vast might be 20 feet across. A passage that seems endless might bend around the corner. Then the passage widened, not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily over the course of maybe 100 yards. The walls pulled apart. The ceiling rose. What had been a comfortable 10-foot wide tunnel became 15 feet, then 20. Priya took measurements every 50 feet, calling them out in her steady, clipped voice. Width at Station 2, 6.1 meters. Width at Station 3, 7.9 meters. That's wrong, Joel said. He didn't say it loudly, but his voice carried in the still air flat and final. I'm reading the instrument, Priya said. I'm not questioning your reading. I'm saying the cave is wrong. You don't get progressive widening like this in a trunk passage. Not at this gradient, not in this lithology. The limestone should be thinning, bedding planes, tightening. This is doing the opposite of everything it should do. I know, Priya said. She wrote the number down and kept walking. By Station 8, her 8th measurement point, roughly 400 meters past BR 447, the ceiling was beyond the reach of our lights. I tilted my headlamp up and saw nothing. Just darkness above, uninterrupted, as if the rock had simply decided not to exist above a certain height. Nate pointed his high-powered hand lamp upward, and the beam went up and up and up and found limestone at what must have been 60 or 70 feet. Maybe more. In a system that a quarter-mile back had 8-foot ceilings. This is what I wanted you to see, Nate said. I understood then why he hadn't tried to explain it over the phone. Because the words, the passages get bigger, didn't capture it. Standing in that widening dark with the walls retreating on both sides and the ceiling lifting away overhead, the sensation wasn't surprise. It was vertigo. The specific vertigo of being in a space that should be small but isn't. My body expected confinement, expected the weight and press of rock that I'd been feeling for 3 hours. And instead, it got openness. And the openness was worse because we were still underground. We were still beneath the mountain. And the space that was opening around us was space that should not, by any reasonable geological model, exist. I want to flag something, Priya said after a long silence of scribbling. We've been walking roughly level, maybe a 2-degree downslope, but my altimeter says we've descended about 70 meters since the terminal station. That's not possible on a 2-degree slope over this distance, Joel said. No, it's not. Instrument error. She showed him her backup altimeter. Same reading. She showed him the clinometer. 2 degrees. She showed him the laser distance readings, everything internally consistent and externally impossible. We had walked a gentle, nearly flat passage and somehow descended 230 feet. Nate watched all of this with the expression of a man whose worst suspicion has been confirmed. Not satisfaction, and something closer to grief. It was like this on every trip, he said. The numbers don't reconcile. They're internally consistent, but they don't add up to anything real. That's why the Virginia Tech team stopped surveying. You talked to them? Joel asked. I found Dr. Renard. He led the survey in '97. He's retired now, lives in Blacksburg. I drove out to see him. Nate paused, rubbing his thumb along the edge of his lamp. He didn't want to talk about it. When I finally got him to open up, he said his team spent 3 trips past the terminal station. Every time their data contradicted their previous readings, not by error margins, by significant amounts. The same passage measured differently on different days. He said it was like trying to survey something that moved. Rock doesn't move, Theo said. It was the first thing he'd said in a while. He'd been quiet since the ceiling disappeared. No, Nate agreed. It doesn't. We kept going. I didn't argue, nobody did. That sounds strange. Maybe 4 experienced cavers and 1 sister with no business being underground, standing in a space that defied basic geology. Hearing that a previous survey team had abandoned the project because the cave seemed to change between visits, and nobody said let's turn around, but that's not how it works in practice. Underground, the danger, is always less frightening than the one you imagine. And we hadn't encountered danger, we'd encountered strangeness. Strangeness pulls you forward. It's only afterward that you realize the pulling was the danger. The passage branched for the first time about an hour past the terminal station. 3 openings, roughly equal in size, radiating from a junction room like spokes from a hub, left, center, right. All 3 were tall enough to walk through upright. All 3 breathed. I could feel air moving from each of them, warm air, which was wrong. Cave air is supposed to be cool. 55 degrees Fahrenheit, give or take. The air coming from these passages was warm the way summer night air is warm. Humid, organic, almost sweet. Nate pointed to the left passage. I've explored that one about 300 meters. It branches again. He pointed center. That one I followed for about 200 meters. Same thing. More branching. He pointed right. I've never been down that one. Why not? Priya asked. Because every time I come to this junction, I count the passages and every time there are 3. But the third one, the one I haven't explored, isn't always in the same position. The silence that followed had texture. I could feel everyone processing, running the sentence back through their minds to make sure they'd heard it correctly. Explain, Joel said. The first time I was here, the right passage was the unexplored one. The next trip, the left passage was the one I didn't recognize, even though I'd gone down it the previous time. It had the same general shape, but the details were different. Formation positions had shifted. The width wasn't what I'd measured before. The third trip, it was the center passage that was unfamiliar. He paused. It rotates, or regenerates. I don't know. I only know that the one I haven't been down is always present and it's never the same one twice. Priya was scribbling rapidly, her handwriting getting tighter the way it did when she was trying to outrun her own disbelief. Theo was sweeping his headlamp across the 3 passages, left to right to left, as if he could catch one of them in the act of changing. I was watching Nate, my brother who had come here 14 times alone, encountered this, documented it, and come back. Not because he was fearless, I knew him better than anyone alive, and I knew he wasn't fearless. But because he needed it to be real. He needed it to not be his mind breaking apart under the weight of all that rock and all that dark. That's why he'd called me. Not to show me something amazing, to have someone he trusted stand next to him and say, yes, I see it too. We go center. Joel said he said it like a decision, not a suggestion, and nobody objected. The group had reached consensus without voting. Joel's 3 decades underground were the heaviest weight in the room, and he'd chosen the passage Nate had at least partially explored before the safe option, or the least unsafe one. Joel stuck a strip of reflective tape to the wall at the junction entrance, arrow pointing back the way we'd come. Nobody touches this, he said. This is our way home. The center passage was where I started to feel afraid. Not the productive, sharpening fear that keeps you careful in tight spaces. The other kind. The slow kind. The kind that sits in your stomach and whispers things your conscious mind hasn't processed yet. The tunnel widened as we walked, just as the main trunk had before. But here, the widening was faster. Within 10 minutes, we were in a space so large that our 5 headlamps barely dented the dark. The floor was smooth, unnaturally smooth, like a riverbed polished by millennia of water but dry. No water, no formations, no stalactite, no stalagmite, no flowstone. Just flat, featureless stone extending in every direction, slightly concave like the inside of a bowl. Then Priya stopped walking and held up her hand. "Listen," she said. We listened and I heard it. A low sound. Not a rumble, lower than that. Almost below hearing more. A vibration than a sound. Something you felt in your sternum and your teeth before your ears fully registered it. It came from everywhere. No direction, no source. It pulsed. Slow, rhythmic, maybe once every 4 or 5 seconds. Like breathing. Like something very, very large taking slow, patient breaths. "Is that seismic?" Theo asked. "No," Priya said. Her voice had gone flat, clinical. "Seismic activity doesn't pulse at regular intervals. That's periodic. That's something keeping time." "Water?" Joel suggested. "Underground river, cyclical siphon. At this depth, with no evidence of active water formation anywhere in the unmapped section." Priya shook her head. "I don't know what that is." We kept going. The sound didn't get louder, but it didn't fade either. It stayed constant, ambient, like a second heartbeat layered over your own. After a while, I stopped noticing it consciously. That bothered me more than the sound itself, how quickly I'd adapted. How quickly my body had accepted the pulse and filed it away as background. This is normal now. Move on. I didn't want to move on. I wanted to feel how wrong it was. But the body has its own priorities, and they don't include sustained vigilance against things that aren't immediately trying to kill you. Nate led us to what he called the gallery. I don't know how else to describe it except to tell you what I saw, in order as I saw it. We walked out of the passage onto a ledge. A genuine ledge. A lip of rock with open space beyond it. And when Nate aimed his strongest lamp outward, the beam traveled and found nothing. The light went out into the dark like a stone thrown into water, swallowed without a ripple. He had a handheld spot, the kind that punches a beam 1,000 feet. He aimed it across the void, sweeping slowly. The far wall was there, barely visible, a flat face of limestone gray and featureless. At a distance I couldn't estimate. A quarter mile, maybe more. He angled the beam upward. The ceiling was there too, impossibly high, studded with formations, massive stalactites or things shaped like stalactites, except they were the size of grain silos hanging from a surface so far above us that the light barely reached it. "This is not possible," Priya whispered. She wasn't talking to anyone. She was saying it to herself as a fact, as an anchor, naming the impossibility as if that would keep it from expanding further. "No," Joel agreed quietly. "It's not." Below our ledge, the floor of the chamber dropped away in a steep scree slope, descending maybe 50 feet to a flat expanse that stretched toward the far wall. And on that flat expanse, on the floor, on the walls as far as the light could reach, we could see them. Marks. Lines scratched into the stone. Thousands of them, tens of thousands. Organized in groups of 5, the universal tally mark, 4 vertical lines and a diagonal slash. They covered every visible surface below us in dense, overlapping clusters, some faint and weathered, others dark and deep. From the ledge, they looked like a texture, like the grain of the stone itself. But they weren't grain. They were counting. Someone or something had been counting for a very long time and hadn't stopped. "Nate," I said. "What are those?" "I don't know," he said. His voice was careful, the way it always got when he was being honest about something he didn't want to be honest about. "I've been down there. They're scratched into the rock. Some of them are deep. A quarter inch, half inch, some are barely visible. Some are old. The edges are weathered, rounded. Could be hundreds of years old. Could be more." He paused, "and some of them are fresh." "Fresh? How?" "Clean cuts, sharp edges, rock dust still sitting in the grooves." He looked at me. In the dim wash of headlamp light, his face was all shadows and angles, and he looked older than 31. "I didn't make them. Marin, I need you to know that. On my life, I didn't make a single one. Who did?" "I don't know, but every time I come back, there are more." It was Priya who decided we should go down. She needed to see the marks up close, needed to photograph them, needed data. Joel went with her. Theo went with Nate to explore the far perimeter. I went with Priya and Joel because I didn't want to be more than arm's length from someone who'd been underground for 30 years and still thought in straight, measurable lines. We picked our way down the scree slope, loose stone shifting and clattering under our boots. The flat floor of the gallery was dusty and dry. Close up, the tally marks were dense enough to overlap. In places, newer marks had been scratched directly over older ones, cutting through the weathered grooves to leave fresh white lines in the gray stone. The variation was striking. Some marks were crude, gouged with what might have been a stone tool, rough and uneven. Others were precise, almost mechanical in their regularity. They ranged from faint surface scratches to deep, deliberate incisions that must have required significant force. And they went on and on in every direction, as far as the light would carry. A carpet of counting that extended beyond the range of our lamps and presumably beyond. Counting what? Counting how long? Counting for whom? She's right, that some of these are old, Joel said, running his fingertips along a section of wall. Look at the patina. These marks have the same weathering as the host rock decades at minimum, possibly centuries. Priya photographed a section of wall at close range, then at medium range, then at wide angle, and these, she said, moving her lamp to an adjacent section, are not. The fresh marks were exactly that, clean white scratches in gray limestone, no patina, no rounding, no dust accumulation, made within days, maybe within hours. From across the chamber, Theo's voice carried, distorted slightly by the distance and the strange acoustics of the space. Guys, come look at this. We crossed the gallery floor toward his light. It took longer than it should have. The distances in that room defeated intuition. What looked like a 30-second walk was a 3-minute walk, and by the time we reached Theo and Nate at the base of the far wall, I was breathing harder than the exertion warranted. They'd found a pile of objects, not natural, arranged, stacked carefully in a rough pyramid about 3 feet high, the way you'd stack firewood or bricks, with intention, with neatness. There were pieces of caving equipment, old and new. Carabiners oxidized green with age beside carabiners still shiny. Pittons, a section of static rope coiled neatly. A carbide lamp housing corroded almost beyond recognition. Next to a modern LED headlamp that still had battery charge, it flickered when Theo touched it. And sitting on top, placed precisely as if on display, a yellow waterproof notebook. Not Priya's. Older, its pages wrinkled and stiff with humidity and time. Nate picked it up, opened it. I watched his face change, a tightening around the eyes, a stillness in the jaw. These are survey notes, he said. Dated 1997. The Virginia Tech team, Dr. Renard's team. They had been here. They had made it this far, past the terminal station, past the branching junction, down into this impossible chamber, and they had left their data behind. Or their data had been collected and placed here, gathered alongside decades of other caving equipment from who knew how many other visitors, organized in a neat, deliberate pile as if by a curator assembling an exhibit. Equipment from different eras, different styles of gear spanning what could be 50 years or 100, all gathered in one place, all arranged. I felt something then that I want to describe precisely, because it's the moment the trip changed for me. It wasn't fear. Fear is an animal response, and it triggers animal impulses: fight, run, freeze. What I felt was closer to recognition. The sudden bodily understanding that I was standing in a space that had structure and intention that I could not perceive, like an ant walking across a desk. The desk isn't hostile to the ant. It isn't even aware of the ant. Not in any way the ant could comprehend. But the desk was put there by something, for a purpose, and the ant's experience of the desk's surface, its texture, its edges, its impossible flatness, has nothing to do with that purpose. We were the ant. The gallery, the widening tunnels, the impossible geometry, the counting marks, the collected artifacts, all of it was the surface of something that operated at a scale we didn't have the framework to comprehend, and whatever maintained it, whatever scratched its tallies into the walls and gathered equipment into neat piles, was not hiding from us. It wasn't lurking in the dark, waiting to spring. It was simply present, the way the geology is present, the way the mountain is present, indifferent to the people who walk across it. And that was worse than malice, far worse. Because you can reason with malice, you can fight it, flee it, negotiate with it. You cannot negotiate with the process. You cannot flee from a landscape. "We should go," Joel said. He said it quietly without urgency, which made it more convincing than if he'd shouted. Joel had made a professional assessment, the same way he'd assessed unstable ceilings and bad air and rising water in 1,000 other underground environments. His assessment was simple. We are out of our depth, literally and otherwise. Nate hesitated. I saw him look at the notebook in his hands, and I saw the pull, the need to keep going, to push deeper, to find the bottom of the thing he discovered. The same pull that had brought him back 14 times. "Nate," I said. Just his name. He looked at me, his sister, the person he'd called on a Tuesday afternoon, because he needed someone to see what he'd seen and tell him it was real. I didn't need to say anything else. He put the notebook in his pack. Priya photographed the equipment pile from several angles. Theo marked the location on Nate's map. Joel was already moving toward the return route, his lamp sweeping the scree slope, picking a path. We started climbing, and that's when the cave showed us what it could do. The passage back to the junction room was different. Not subtly, not ambiguously, not in any way that could be explained by disorientation or fatigue, or the tricks that darkness plays on spatial memory. The tunnel we had walked through 2 hours earlier, the one that widened steadily as we'd gone deeper, had changed. Joel noticed first. He was in front now, leading the return, moving with the deliberate efficiency of someone who has learned to conserve energy underground. He stopped maybe 5 minutes into the return passage and put his hand on the wall. "This was narrower," he said. "How much narrower?" Priya asked. I marked the width with my arm span on the way in. I do it by habit. This passage was just over 2 arm spans wide at this point. It's now at least 3. Priya took a measurement. Her face went very still. He's right. Width here is 9.3 meters. I measured this section on the way in at 6.4. 3 meters wider, nearly 10 feet in 2 hours. We kept walking. The ceiling was higher than it had been. The floor's undulations subtly different, gentle rises and dips that I was certain hadn't been there before. But the overall direction was right. The general shape of the passage was recognizable, and Nate's reflective markers were in the correct order on the walls. We weren't lost, we were in the right tunnel, heading in the right direction. The tunnel was just bigger and longer. We'd walked 40 minutes from the junction to the gallery. After 40 minutes of walking back at the same pace, we weren't at the junction. After 50 minutes, we weren't at the junction. After an hour with everyone's pace quickening unconsciously, steps getting shorter and faster, breathing getting shallower, we still weren't there. "Stop," Joel said. We stopped. He pulled out his compass, took a reading, checked it against Priya's notes from the way in. "We're on the right heading. We haven't deviated. The passage hasn't branched. We should be there." "We should have been there 20 minutes ago," Priya said. Her voice was steady, but I could see her hands gripping the notebook with white-knuckled force. "The passage is longer than it was," Nate said. He said it simply, without drama. The way you'd say it's raining. "Passages don't get longer," Theo said, but his voice was thin, and the statement came out sounding like a question he already knew the answer to. "No," Nate said, "they don't." Nobody panicked. I want to make that clear because it matters. Nobody screamed. Nobody cried. Nobody froze. What happened instead was something quieter and in some ways more unsettling. We all adjusted. Every person in that group recalibrated their understanding of where they were and what was happening, and kept moving. There was a conversation, short, practical, about pace, about battery life, about time estimates. Joel and Priya compared notes and made new calculations. Theo inventoried our remaining supplies. Nate checked his markers ahead. I carried gear and stayed close and tried to keep my breathing even. We made decisions together, not because anyone declared it a democracy, because the situation demanded it. Do we speed up and risk injury on the uneven floor? Consensus? Moderate pace. Watch your footing. Do we conserve headlamp batteries by reducing to 3 active lamps? Consensus? Yes, Theo and I switched to backup chemical lights. Do we stop and rest or push through? Consensus, push through. Every minute the passage might be getting longer. That last thought, unspoken, shared by everyone, was the one that kept our feet moving. Another 20 minutes, then ahead, the distinct change in air current that signals a junction. The 3 openings appeared in the sweep of Joel's lamp, and there on the wall beside the center passage we'd emerged from, Joel's reflective tape arrow pointing back toward the terminal station. Everyone exhaled, collectively, audibly. I hadn't realized I'd been clenching my jaw for the past half hour until the muscles released and my teeth ached. Joel walked to his arrow and put his hand on it the way someone would touch a railing after nearly falling. Then he turned to face the group. We don't stop, we don't rest. We move. Nobody argued. We entered the return passage, the main trunk, heading back toward station BR447, toward the map, toward the surveyed system with its aluminum station markers and its consistent data, back toward the world where measurement meant something. It was longer. We'd come out from the terminal station to the junction in roughly 2 hours. The return took more than 4. 4 hours of walking through a passage that should have been half that long, following Nate's reflective dots in their correct sequence, watching Priya's measurements tell us the same thing over and over. The dimensions were changing. The passage was wider than it had been on the outbound trip. The ceiling was higher. The floor was smoother. Not dramatically, not enough to make you think you were in a different cave. Just enough to be certain. Just enough to know with the weight of data and shared observation that the stone around you had moved around the 3-hour mark of the return. The pulsing sound stopped between one step and the next. The low vibration that had been our constant companion since the junction room cut off. The silence it left was physical. I felt it in my inner ears, in the sudden absence of a frequency I'd stopped consciously hearing, but my body had been tracking. The cave was quiet in a way that pressed against my eardrums, the kind of silence that has pressure, that pushes inward. Nobody said anything. Joel's pace increased slightly. We followed. I had the irrational, overwhelming sense that something was paying attention, not watching. There was nothing to see, no eyes, no presence I could locate, just attention. The way you can feel someone reading over your shoulder, even when you can't see them. The cave had been breathing, and now it had stopped, and the pause felt deliberate. Priya called out a number. Her voice was too loud in the silence, and we all flinched. With 3.1 meters. A few minutes later, with 2.8 meters, the cave was shrinking back to normal. The return to familiar dimensions felt like stepping out of deep water, a physical relief, a easing of pressure I hadn't fully recognized until it began to release. The walls closing in meant we were getting closer to the surveyed system. Every measurement Priya called was a step back toward the world that obeyed rules. With 2.4 meters. That's consistent with the published survey, Joel said. We're close. Station BR447. Aluminum disc, bolt in the wall, blocky yellow spray paint. Survey terminates, passage continues. Joel put his hand on the survey marker and held it there for a moment. Just stood there, palm flat against the aluminum, feeling the reality of a thing that had been measured and named and documented by people who'd followed the rules and gotten numbers that added up. Then he turned to Nate. You've done that 14 times? Nate nodded. Alone. Nate nodded again. Joel looked at him with an expression I couldn't entirely read. Part respect, part something closer to sorrow. The look of a man recognizing a kind of courage he wished he didn't have to admire. You're the bravest caver I know, he said, and I want you to stop. The return through the mapped system was uneventful. Every station matched, every dimension was correct. Every reading Priya took aligned with the published survey down to the centimeter. Whatever was happening in Bridger Cavern, it stayed beyond the terminal station. The surveyed system was fixed, stable, documented, real. The real cave, I thought, and then caught myself. Because the unmapped part was also real. That was the whole problem. Both halves were real. One just refused to stay the same. We emerged into daylight at 6:47 p.m. Having been underground for just over 11 hours, The sun was low and orange through the trees, throwing long shadows across the bluff face. The air smelled like soil and rain and rhododendron and living things, and I stood at the cave entrance and breathed it in and felt the specific physical relief of being out, of having sky above me instead of stone, of standing on a surface with nothing above it but air and weather and open space. But even then, standing in the evening light, mud drying on my boots, listening to the birds, I noticed something. Not a sound, not a sight. A feeling like a new sense had opened up, or an old one had been recalibrated. I could feel the ground under my feet, not as a surface, but as a depth. Not as the top of something, but as the thinnest layer of something. I could feel in the part of my brain that processes space and mass and orientation, the presence of what was beneath me. Not specifically, not the way you feel a cavity or a void, more the way you feel the ocean when you're standing on a pier. The sheer volume of it, the weight and the motion and the depth, all communicated through the wood under your feet. The ground was solid, I knew it was solid, but solid is a surface property. And what's beneath the surface is a question I hadn't known how to ask before Bridger, and couldn't stop asking after. We talked in the motel that night. All 5 of us in Nate's room, sitting on the beds and the floor with Priya's notes and photographs spread between us. The conversation was remarkably calm. No one was panicking, no one was in denial. We'd all seen the same things, measured the same impossibilities, walked the same 2 long passages. The data was consistent in its inconsistency, and there's a strange comfort in that, in shared observation, in numbers that 5 people can look at and agree on, even when the numbers describe something that shouldn't exist. Priya laid it out clinically. The passage beyond the terminal station had expanded by measurable amounts during our visit, wider, taller, and longer on the return than on the outbound trip. The altimeter discrepancy was confirmed. We descended far deeper than the slope geometry allowed. The temperature gradient was reversed, and the tally marks, she showed us her photographs side by side on her laptop. The tally marks had increased between our entering and leaving the gallery. Same section of wall, same camera angle, same focal length. On the outbound photograph, dense tally marks filling the frame. On the return photograph taken perhaps 90 minutes later, the same marks plus 7 new ones, clean, sharp, fresh, made while we were there, she said. By what? Theo asked. I don't know. That was the refrain of the evening. I don't know. None of us knew. But the conversation that mattered wasn't about what, it was about what next. And this is where I think about the group constantly. The fact that there were 5 of us. The fact that no single person made the decision. Joel spoke first. I'm reporting this to the NSS. Full documentation. Recommended access restriction pending further study. The National Speleological Society. The closest thing American caving has to a governing body. Priya agreed immediately. My data needs to be replicated. We need independent teams running simultaneous surveys. We need ground-penetrating radar, gravimetric readings, long-duration seismic monitoring. This needs resources none of us have. The Theo, who had been quiet, said, I think people should know, not just the NSS. Everyone meaning who? Joel asked. Meaning everyone. This isn't a caving thing. This is a geology thing. A physics thing, a reality thing. If the measurements are right, then something fundamental about how we understand underground space is wrong. Joel shook his head. Theo, if we go public with this, one of 2 things happens. Either we're dismissed as crackpots, or we're believed, and every recreational caver with a YouTube channel tries to get past BR 447. Both outcomes are bad. So we just sit on it. We document it properly. We bring in people with credentials and equipment. We do this right. They looked at each other, then they looked at Nate. My brother was sitting on the edge of the bed, hands between his knees, staring at the spread of maps and data. He'd been quiet through most of the discussion. I knew what he was thinking because I'd known him for 31 years, and I could read the specific quality of his silence, the one that meant he was fighting himself. They'll close the cave, he said finally. They should close the cave, Joel said, not unkindly. The way you'd say it to someone you respected. Nate, whatever is down there. Whatever is making those marks and rearranging equipment and changing the dimensions of the passages, it's not something we can manage. It's not something any of us can manage. The responsible thing to do is restrict access and let people with real resources figure out what's happening. And if they can't, then at least nobody gets hurt while they're trying. The room was quiet. The five of us, tired and dirty, and still processing, sitting in a cheap motel room in rural West Virginia, deciding what to do about a hole in the ground that didn't obey the laws of physics. Nate looked at me, not at Joel, whose experience outweighed his, not at Priya, whose data was irrefutable, not at Theo, whose instinct for transparency matched his own, at me, his sister, the person who'd driven 5 hours and left her daughter and gone underground for him. "What do you think?" he asked. And it mattered, genuinely, materially mattered that he asked, because it meant the decision wasn't his alone. It wasn't Joel's, it belonged to the group. "Tell them," I said, "report it, document everything. Bring in whoever needs to be brought in." I held his gaze. "You were right, Nate. It's real. All of us saw it. You don't need to keep going back to prove that anymore." He looked at me for a long time, my little brother who'd gone into the dark 14 times alone, because he needed the truth to be witnessed and who was now being asked to hand that truth to other people and step back. "Okay," he said. "We drove home on Sunday." I hugged Nate in the parking lot and told him to call me during the week. Not on a Tuesday afternoon with a mission. On normal days, at normal times, about normal things, he said he would. Joel filed his report the following Monday. Priya began formatting her data for peer review. Theo, to his credit, kept quiet. The process would take time, weeks, probably months, but it was moving in the right direction, through the right channels, properly. I've been home for 11 days now. Lily is fine. David is fine. The house is fine. Everything is exactly as I left it. The blocks are still on the living room floor where Lily abandoned them. The calendar on the fridge still has my weekend away marked in blue pen. The world above ground is precisely as solid and ordinary and stable as it was before I went to West Virginia. Except that I'm different. I don't mean that in a dramatic way. There's no entity following me. No shadow in the corner of my eye. No voices, no nightmares, no cold spots, no things that go bump. I passed a full physical last Thursday. Blood work, cardiac panel, neurological screen. Everything normal. I'm healthy. I'm functional. I'm not losing my mind. The difference is simpler and more total than any of that. I understand the ground now. Not the way a geologist understands it, as layers and formations, as processes and timescales. I understand it the way you understand the body of someone you've held. Intuitively, spatially. I can feel the depth beneath me. Sitting here at this table, I can feel the basement below my feet, and the concrete pad below that, and the clay below that, and the limestone below that, and beneath all of it, far beneath, in the deep places where the maps end, the spaces that are still growing. Because that's the thing I haven't said yet. The thing that Priya's data implies, but that I feel with certainty. The way you feel gravity or hunger or the passage of time. The cave is growing. Not was, is. Right now, while I write this, the unmapped passages beyond BR 447 are expanding. Wider, taller, longer. Not toward us, not with purpose, not with malice or hunger or intent. The way a crystal grows, the way a river cuts, the way anything in nature does the thing it does. Because it's the thing it does, and it doesn't need a reason, and it won't stop because we measured it. The tunnels beneath Bridger Cavern are wider tonight than they were when we walked through them 11 days ago, and they'll be wider tomorrow. And the day after that, and the survey limit, that yellow line of spray paint, survey terminates, passage continues, holds. The mapped world stays the same size. The unmapped world gets larger. I think about the tally marks. Priya sent me her preliminary analysis last week. Based on weathering patterns, patina accumulation, and stratigraphy of overlapping marks, the oldest tallies are at least 300 years old. The newest were made within hours of our visit. Someone or something has been counting in that chamber for 3 centuries. And the count goes up. Always up. Whatever is being measured hasn't stopped or reversed or paused in all that time. I think about Dr. Raynard and his Virginia Tech team, who surveyed 5 miles of clean, beautiful, reliable data, and then reached the place where reliability ends, where the act of documentation requires that the thing being documented hold still, and it doesn't. They drew their line and stopped and never came back. And for 25 years, the cave kept going without them, growing without them, being counted without them. I think about the equipment pile, the gathered artifacts of every person who went past the terminal station and left something behind, or had something taken and arranged. A collection spanning decades, maybe a century, maintained, curated by something that doesn't leave the cave, because it is the cave. And I think about this, the ground I live on, the ground my daughter plays on, the ground that holds up this house and this street and this city and every city. It is solid, I know that. It bears weight, it supports life, it's real in every way that matters to the daily business of being human. But solid is a surface condition. Solid means the top holds. It says nothing about what's underneath or how far down the underneath goes, or what the underneath is doing while we walk around on top of it and call it firm. Most people never ask. I can't stop asking. Lily came into the kitchen yesterday while I was sitting here. She'd been playing in her room, and she padded in barefoot with that particular 3-year-old focus, ignoring everything in the world except the single thing that brought her to me. She climbed into my lap and pressed her ear against my chest, the way she does when she wants to hear my heartbeat. She's done it since she was a baby. My heartbeat is her favorite sound. She told me that once, in the way 3-year-olds tell you things, simply without embarrassment, as if stating the most obvious fact in the world. "Your heart is my favorite, Mama." She listened for a while. Then she pulled back and looked at me. "Mama," she said, "your heart sounds like the floor." I held her and didn't say anything, because she wasn't wrong. Since Bridger, my resting heartbeat has changed. Not faster, not slower, not irregular. My doctor says it's structurally and functionally perfect, but it's deeper than it used to be. Slower, stronger. It resonates in a frequency I can feel in my sternum and my jaw and the bones of my hands, a low, steady pulse, once every 4 or 5 seconds, that vibrates through my whole body instead of just my chest. The same interval, the same rhythm, the same frequency as the sound in the cave. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe 11 hours underground recalibrated something in my autonomic nervous system, and in a month it'll fade, and I'll feel the way I did before. Maybe a cardiologist would have a perfectly boring explanation. Maybe Lily just heard what 3-year-olds hear. Patterns in everything. Connections that adults learn to ignore. But at night, when the house is quiet, when Lily is asleep and David is asleep and the dishwasher is done and the world has gone still, I lie in the dark with my hand on my chest and I feel it, my pulse deep and slow and strong. And beneath it, below the mattress and the floor and the foundation and the earth, something answers. The same rhythm, the same frequency, call and response, between my body and the deep places in a language I didn't learn and can't unlearn and don't entirely want to. The maps end. I know where they end. I've stood at the yellow line. I've seen what continues past it. And I've walked the passages that grow while you're inside them. And I've heard the breathing of something that has been keeping count for 300 years. And now, sitting in my kitchen in the middle of an ordinary night, I can feel the edge of the map inside my own chest. The place where the known, measured, documented rhythm of a human heart gives way to something deeper, something that doesn't end. The tunnels don't stop. I don't think I do either.